North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news, the real news. We report the news honestly, straightforwardly. We analyze the news for fact. We make comment on both fact and bias because that's what we're analyzing the news for. Then what we do is, I make commentary. And that commentary is not news. That commentary is simply what I believe. Just my opinion. Just as valuable as yours. And that's debate. Let's get together and compare notes. The objective of this broadcast is to have more truth at the end of it than we did at the beginning of it, which is right now. So there's some confusing news coming out of Washington, D.C. and coming out of the financial markets. By the way, Flem Coughley wins the chat derby this afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us, Flem. Appreciate it. So the Consumer Price Index, which is the report that measures inflation, is still uncomfortably high. This from the New York Times today. Inflation remained uncomfortably rapid in August despite a decline in gas costs, as prices continue to soar across a broad survey of other goods and services. Evidence that sustainable slowdown the Federal Reserve and the White House have been hoping for is still elusive. Prices rose 8.3% from a year earlier compared to 8.5% in July. The White House is going to tout this as a downward trend of inflation. Indeed, there is going to be some form of celebration by President Biden in just a little bit. We are going to cover that live here on the Wells Report as soon as the president steps to the podium in the Rose Garden. The people that do these things for a living, the people that are forecasting inflation and so on, expected a much steeper decline in inflation. That did not happen, and that sent ripples through the markets. More about that coming up in just a couple of moments. Prices rose 8.3%. The disappointing data came after falling gas prices pulled inflation lower, with rapidly rising costs for rent, healthcare, restaurant meals, goods such as furniture offsetting the relief customers were feeling at the fuel pump. More bad news, a core index that strips out gas and food to get a sense of underlying inflation trends accelerated by more than was expected. For policymakers, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, who have been raising interest rates to slow the economy and try to tame recent rapid inflation, the report was a fresh sign that price increases have yet to come back into control. As a matter of fact, they are not. There needs to be continued aggressive action to bring inflation lower. And that means that the Fed is going to raise interest rates even by more than a possible 75 basis points, which would be 3/4 of a point. They may raise the interest rates a full point just to shut down the economy even more, which unfortunately will press us into more of a recession than where we actually are right now, which will mean that inflation will continue to rise. There's no way we're going to be able to evade any of this. So economists said that the Consumer Price Index data cemented the case for a third straight unusually large 3/4 percentage rate point that the Fed might make at the central bank's meeting next week. Stocks swooned. Investigators began to speculate officials could opt for an even more drastic full percentage point adjustment. Inflation remains hot. Financial conditions have seen some improvement. The labor markets are humming along, said Neil Duda. He's the head of the U.S. economics at Renaissance Micro. He wrote in a research note following the release, if the goal is to slow things down, create some pain, the Fed is failing by its own standard. There's politics. There's politics in their statement. I don't know what Neil Duda does for a living, but I don't know. I personally think he's basically trying to put a nice spin on it. That's just my opinion. Meanwhile, back to the news. The Fed closely watches core inflation making its rebound in August a point of particular concern After cutting out food and fuel, consumer prices climbed by 6.3% in the year through last month. That was up from 5.9% in July and more than the 6.1% economists had projected. Even looking at overall inflation, the report's detail offered plenty to worry about. Two products. Now, this is the New York Times reporting this, okay? So there's a left bias in the first place, but they're saying, hey, this is serious. Two products that have been major drivers of inflation over the past year, gas and used cars, are now posting outright price cuts. But other goods and services are picking up in price so much that it's offsetting those declines. Prices climbed by 0.1% over the course of the past month amid rapid price increases for a broad array of products and services, including food away from home, new cars, dental care, and vehicle repair. The upshot is that inflation has plenty of underlying momentum. That's unlikely to keep the Fed firmly in the inflation. That is likely, rather, to keep the Fed firmly in inflation-fighting mode. They may go a full point on this next rate increase. Central bankers are waiting for a sustained slowdown in price increases to convince them that their policies are working to cool demand and nudge the economy back toward a healthy environment in which inflation is low, steady, and barely noticeable. Until that happens, officials have pledged to keep raising interest rates, moves that can slow borrowing, constrain consumer demand, tamp down hiring, and wage growth. Inflation is too high, and it's too soon to say whether inflation is moving meaningfully and persistently downward. This, according to Christopher Waller, a Fed governor, in a speech last week. This is a fight we cannot and will not walk away from. No, they can't. The Fed arguably exists to control inflation. This is what they do for a living. And that apparently is what they are going to continue doing until they get this under control. So the Wall Street Journal says it this way: the market did not like what it saw in the Consumer Price Index report, how much the Dow is off over 1,000 points as we come to this. Let me see what we have here from a standpoint of where we are. At this particular moment, rapidly closing in on the close, the Dow is off over 1,048 points. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Getting back to the Wall Street Journal. More than 1,000 points in recent trading. U.S. stocks fell. Treasury yields rose after the data came in higher than expected. The pace of U.S. consumer price inflation cooled comparatively with previous months, but remained close to a four-decade high, up 8.3% in August from the same month a year ago. This, according to the Labor Department. That led investors to sell everything: stocks, bonds, oil, gold, everything. The increase was 8.5% in July, 9.1% in June, which was the highest inflation rate in 4 decades. The CPI measures, Consumer Price Index, measures what consumers pay for goods and services. Today's report will be key in determining the path ahead for interest rates before the next Federal Reserve meeting. Analysts had hoped that the Fed officials would consider easing their pace of interest rate increases if data continued to show inflation subsiding. The data undercut those hopes and reversed Monday's optimistic pre-CPI gains. More in the markets, crypto traders, blah, 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 blah. That was that. Okay, so once again, looking at some of the news in stocks, this is the Telegraph, if you want to call it that. There are all kinds of business things. Eastman Chemical cuts forecast on slowing demand. Hycroft Mining surges on a mining report. That's good. Unity shares slide after Apple Lovin withdraws an $18 billion takeover offer. And this is all just basic stuff. Inflation pushing stock prices broadly lower today. Like I said, the President of the United States is theoretically going to be speaking to us from the Rose Garden, which may be singularly inappropriate today, insofar as the news is not great when it comes to the economy. Now, yeah, okay. So in I guess it was June. In June, it was 9.1%. Everybody went, what? And then 8.5, now 8.3. It's not coming down quickly enough. The Fed must continue to act. and it's going to get dicey financially for a while. It's going to be, and yes, I don't know why the president is going to do this. It's really going to be bad optics for him to talk about how his policies are helping out the economy as the Dow Jones takes a 1,000 point dive. There is a chance for the bargain hunters to move in. Those people who believe that the stock market and the overall economy is in better shape than people will. These reports seem to indicate, and they may do their best in trying to shore up a market in a late surge or two. So, but 1,000 points, well, that's a significant amount. And indeed, if the Dow is down that much at the end of the day today, people are going to say, okay, maybe this is the beginning. This is the first indication that when it comes to this economy, you can't defy gravity forever. There are certain things that you can try to do. There are certain valves you can turn, certain switches you can throw. Consumers were badly hurt by gasoline prices. And so things were done to try to ease gasoline prices, but nothing was done to ease diesel prices. So a vast majority of us who do not use diesel fuel saw some relief. Diesel fuel came down a little bit, but now it's edging its way back up ahead of the gasoline prices, which have not started to edge their way up. But Janet Yellen yesterday was talking about how we needed to prepare ourselves for higher gasoline prices. And so these things, when you start messing around with a nation's energy, especially in a place of prosperity where we were a couple of years ago, and remember, just take the politics out of it, okay? Just take the politics out of it. Just deal with the realities, all right? When 2 years ago, we were in a position where we were exporting energy and the basic building blocks of the economy were happy. And that went away. And then we started getting political with a whole bunch of things that deal dramatically with our economy. Suddenly there was $1.9 trillion in everybody's pocket. And the market expanded to collect that money. And now the Fed is trying to expand interest rates to soak that money back up. But there are certain things that you can't mess with when it comes to an economy. And those basic things, like gasoline, have way too much impact on a lot of the things that drive this economy. And that's why deciding for whatever reason, just for political ideology, that what you're going to do is, well, we're going to get away from fossil fuels. We're just going to stop using them. We're going to open up a brand new industry, which is not the government's business. Their business is to govern. Their business is not to call winners or to make winners out of losers and vice versa in an economy. And that is exactly what they're doing. And yes, from what we understand, the president is going to speak to us a little bit later on. We will carry that speech live. And I will do my absolute dead level best to maintain my my professional countenance. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. We are bringing you the news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary. That's not news. That's my opinion. And that leads us to debate, where we compare our opinions and compare our takes on things and try to move the ball forward from a standpoint of truth. It's what we do here. I want to tell you that you can join us on that debate anytime you want to. We got a telephone number here. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. You can join us at your leisure. The operator is standing by. Also, you can join us on the chat. And we've been talking a little bit about the economy, and we're waiting for the president to speak. They're saying that this is an event celebrating the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Currently going at this particular moment is James Taylor. He's doing a concert, and apparently that has just stopped with the de rigueur standing ovation for James Taylor. And I can't explain it either. The only thing that I can say is that the Dow's off over 1,000 points at this particular moment, and inflation is not going anywhere, and people are paying 8.3% more for everything than they paid last year, and things are looking a little twangy and tone deaf at the White House these days. This is a huge gathering, by the way. I believe it's all 50 flags from the 50 United States, and there are probably at least 1,000, maybe more there. And I can't explain it. I can't explain why it would do something. Hopefully, maybe we can find something out about that, and we'll work our way through it. Like I said, a lot of people are here on the chat room. You can find that on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. You can also find it on YouTube. Let's see. Kelly Lyon says hi. Mike Renwee says, we can't spend our way out of this. You're completely correct. You cannot spend your way into prosperity. You just can't do it. And yeah, we are pointing out that that this is not a good day for a victory lap. Let's see who else. Jess says hi. Hope you're having a great Tuesday, and I certainly hope you are. And Mike Renwee says, well, we're not exactly waiting for the president to speak. Well, yeah, okay, but please understand that's the business we're in. It's the life we've chosen. This is the news, and we follow the news and carry the news. By the way, the celebration of the passage of the Inflation Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, is sort of sitting there doing nothing right now. No one's on stage. Nobody's speaking. They're all sitting there looking at the, I believe, the front of the White House. And so there you go. So I guess this celebration far too large for the Rose Garden. We heard that that's where it was going to be earlier today, but apparently not the case. There are people saying they already feel less inflated, but only 2%, 2/10 of a point. You're 2/10 of a point less inflated than you were a few minutes ago. Anyway, what I want to say is that you're welcome here, and please, by all means, join us. There is something that happened today. I went to Topgolf, and I was playing a little bit of Topgolf with a dear friend of mine, Ken Lynch. And I was talking to him, and this lovely young lady said, I know that voice. I listened to you. And I walked over and met Tempe is her name. And Tempe is, a wonderful young lady, like I said. And she said, I listened to you because I'm looking for truth. And I said, how long have you been listening? And she said, well, I've been watching and listening on Facebook, which means that there have been a lot of people that listen to me on the radio, but she is someone who found me only on Facebook. So maybe this is working just a little bit. And I thought that was nice. Tempe, thank you very much for lifting my day and my spirits. I sincerely appreciate it. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for joining us. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Currently speaking at the podium before the arrival of President Biden is Chuck Schumer. He is the majority leader of the United States Senate, flanked by Nancy Pelosi. They are both standing there talking about the Inflation Reduction Act with a whole bunch of people that cheer everything having to do with climate change in the Inflation Reduction Act. They're talking about how these jobs created by the creation of an entire industry, that being what they call green energy, these jobs are going to be around for a long, long time. Well, we will see. But meanwhile, we have Chuck Schumer speaking at the White House at this particular moment. Let's go ahead and listen to some of the things that he has to say. Quite strident today. And there are people attempting to stand up for something he just said.
And of course, I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and every one of my House colleagues who worked to pass this bill. It's been a long process, but the House Democratic Caucus stayed the course, worked incredibly hard, and made this moment possible. Thank you all. And finally, I want to thank President Biden. We would never have gotten the Inflation Reduction Act done without his steady hand. For over a year and a half, he dared us to dream big, pushed us to aim high, and urged us to never let go of our promise to the American people, especially on climate. Like the rest of us, he persisted and persisted to push this bill over the finish line. He has restored dignity, respect, and a sense of action back to the Oval Office. So thank you, President Biden, for your incredible leadership. Americans are seeing what it looks like to have a president and a Congress that's focused on delivering results to make their lives better. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your tremendous work. On to future victories, everybody.
And so that is Chuck Schumer. We are now waiting to see if Nancy Pelosi is planning on speaking, and it looks as though she is. Once again, this is a celebration for the Inflation Reduction Act.
Madam Vice President, Leader Schumer, colleagues, staff. Again, let's hear it for the staff, because the staff has made such a thing. And so many friends. What a thrill it is to be here to celebrate this life-changing legislation, making the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act, so beautifully named for all that it does. As the name suggests, this landmark law is cutting costs and inflation fighting and driving down costs for kitchen table items for America's working families. Mr. President, thank you for unifying and inspiring a vision of a stronger, fairer, safer future for all, for our children. Your extraordinary leadership has made this glorious day possible. That's an applause line. Jill was applauding. And let us salute Leader Schumer, his colleagues in the Senate, for their extraordinary leadership and the success in bringing this bill forward.
That's an applause line.
Okay, so this is clearly a political affair. We'll wait for the president to show up as they're congratulating each other on what they call a solution for a problem they created. In other words, the people that they're talking about who said, we've got to do something about climate. We have to do something about climate and so on and so on. We're all politicians, not just here in the United States, but around the world, as they all chase this idea of getting rid of the most plentiful, the most effective, the most efficient energy that we currently possess as human beings. Get rid of that for whatever reason and move to a completely different economy that doesn't exist yet. None of this exists. I was at Topgolf, as I said just a couple of seconds ago. I was at Topgolf. I wasn't there a couple of seconds ago. I was there earlier this afternoon, and I saw two I saw two magnificent charging stations there. There were two of them. So if you had an electric car, you could go right to Topgolf and you could plug your car right on in there and charge your car. There was a sign on the charging station. What did it say? They said there was a 2-hour limit. A 2-hour limit? You can only charge your car for 2 hours. So let me put this into context with you, okay? Let me put this into context. So there are two charging stations. I guess in this brand new world, there'll be charging stations everywhere. But there were two charging stations here right now, and this is where we find ourselves now. So two charging stations. You're at Topgolf. You're going to go in there and you're going to play Topgolf for an hour or two. Okay, so you're going to leave your car charging while you go play and then interrupt yourself because your 2 hours is up. Is that what you're going to do? Or when you get finished and so on and so on? But once again, this gives you an example of what we're dealing with here. We have power grids that are not ready for an electric car revolution. We don't have charging stations in places that are going to be plentiful enough to actually use. Keep something in mind. The government wants to spend $500 billion on charging stations. Well, there are going to still be a lot more cars than there are charging stations. So you're traveling across country. You're traveling across country in your electric car. You're going to be sitting where? At one of those rest areas? You're going to be sitting there for how many hours? Well, let's say I guess these cars charge in about 6 hours. So you're going to go someplace, you're going to have to wait for your turn in line, and then you're going to have to wait 6 hours. Okay, for those of us who travel across country, we try to travel 500-600 miles every day, and then we stop. And our particular cars take about 15 minutes to recharge if there's a bathroom break involved. In other words, none of this is ready. All these people are moving forward with the destruction of what they call fossil fuel. And then they don't have they have no place for the economy to land. This has disaster written all over it. This has disaster written all over it. And by the way, if you have a Tesla, if you have an electric car, please call me on the telephone. Tell me what it's like. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Nancy Pelosi is still talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually the Green New Deal. Nobody's really that charged up. They wouldn't have over 1,000 people sitting on the White House grounds. They would not have, and I guess this is the rear of the White House, because I think I see the West Wing over there. So that being said, there wouldn't be 1,000 people there at least, just to celebrate the Inflation Reduction Act, which isn't, by the way, going to reduce inflation for another 2 years or so. So once again, this is not the Inflation Reduction Act. This is the skinny Green New Deal. And there you go. So let's see. Electric cars are barely good for around town, the DFW area, not to mention a trip to Houston. Exactly. Electric delivery companies should refuse to power the charging stations. Well, they are not going to be charging. They're not going to be powering the charging stations. You know what's going to be charging the stations? A large diesel generator is going to be charging these stations. Think about it. Go out on the interstate highway system. Okay, go out on the interstate highway system. Everywhere you see a gas station, except there won't be that many because they're just, the private sector is going to realize that there's no money in this at some point. And so what's going is that go on out there, there's going to be a government recharging station that will probably be sold if at some point to a private concern. And so there's going to be this large, gigantic, locomotive-sized diesel engine powering, oh, I don't know, probably 10 charging stations. And that's going to happen, what, every 400 miles? We're going to have one of those every 300 or 400 miles. So imagine seeing one diesel locomotive chugging away as fast as it possibly can to create electricity for charging stations every 300 or 400 miles across every highway in America, because that's what it's going to take. And these will be little enclaves where you can sit there and do something. You got to do something to keep the kids happy while you're charging your car. I mean, this is a mess. This is a very serious mistake. And they're charging along and celebrating every move. Lindsey Graham, by the way, I mean, one of the things that you did not hear because it happened right at the bottom of the hour, Chuck Schumer was talking about how they were celebrating the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually the Green New Deal, but called by something else because they couldn't get the Green New Deal passed, but they could get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. So they passed the Inflation Reduction Act. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually the Green New Deal. So anyway, that being said, they're working their way through all of this, and then they point out, Chuck Schumer points out, that the Republicans are trying to put a 15-week national ban on abortions, and everybody booed. Yeah. That, by the way, is a bill by Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina. Yeah, by the way, Yvonne points out that, yeah, those diesel generators are going to be just fine. They're going to be just fine. They're going to be working just perfectly right until they run out of diesel fuel. And by the way, respectfully, the diesel fuel that is intended for what? Diesel fuel that's intended for semi-tractor trailers. The President of the United States is now approaching the lectern with two Marines side by side. Also joining him is Vice President Harris and the President of the United States with appropriate music, ruffles and flourishes, etc. And the Vice President is going to speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Please have a seat. Good afternoon. What a beautiful day. It is good to be with so many extraordinary American leaders and friends, and I thank you all. President Joe Biden, members of our cabinet, members of Congress, and my fellow Americans. When the president and I took office, we made a promise. In the face of profound crises, and after years of gridlock, we promised the American people action.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the
To
mic.
build an America in which every person, no matter where they start, has the opportunity to succeed and to thrive. Over the past year and a half, because of the leadership of President Biden, we are delivering on that promise. Mr. President, in the darkest days of the pandemic, you saw the tremendous challenges facing our nation, but you also saw the tremendous courage and resilience of the American people. And you knew if we gave folks a chance, America would come through this crisis stronger than ever. And we have. Today, students are back in school. Mostly the parents clapping there.
All right. So that's Vice President Harris talking. Like I said, we will be more than happy to to speak with the president or listen to the president speak. When the president speaks, if that indeed happens during this break, we will interrupt the little sojourn there that we use for radio stations to play their commercials. And what we'll do is we will listen to the president offline, then we'll join live on the Wells Report coming up in just a couple of moments. This is not a celebration of an Inflation Reduction Act. This is a celebration of leftist political policy that is essentially being levered by what they call the Green New Deal. I have thoughts on just exactly what we're watching here. I will share those thoughts with you coming up in just a couple of moments. You are listening to the Wells Report. This will be right back. We will be right back. Stay put. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells, the president, the vice president, and a young woman from the IBEW, the Electrical Workers Union in Boston. She is currently speaking, and she is talking about her background as a union apprentice learning the ways of electricity. As a matter of fact, I used to be a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They organized the DJs in Sacramento, California 30 years ago. Yeah, that was my first foray into union life. They really didn't help the DJs very much. They really didn't. But they did make it possible for us not to shop at Alpha Beta when they were on strike. So that's what I got out of my union experience. Plus, I paid them hundreds of dollars. So So that was what I was doing. Anyway, this is the whole thing that they're dealing with the Green New Deal disguised as the Inflation Reduction Act is essentially creating what will be a much more electrical use country if they are successful in this. And I don't know that they're going to be. They don't have the battery technology necessary. They don't have the superconducting technology necessary. They don't have any of the infrastructure required to do this. And what they're doing is they're ruining one industry, which, by the way, has to be planned out decades in advance. They're ruining one industry in order to completely build from the ground up another industry, which is this so-called clean energy future, which does not exist. When they say clean energy future, they really mean it. I mean, it's a clean energy future that is solely for the future, because it's not here now. I mean, so far we have the never-ending amusing story of California talking about how everybody needs to be with their electric cars, and then the people who are responsible for actually making sure that the grid functions in California are telling people not to recharge their cars. And that was happening in evening hours. How are they going to get to work? How are they going to get to work? You know, this is sophistry. This is something that is not ready for prime time in any way, shape, or form. It simply isn't. Which means it's a political progress or a political project. So what is the circumstance? What are we trying to get done here? It's really, really hard not to think about what the motivation is here. The motivation here is a less mobile, more controllable society. Remember what I was talking about before the break. We were talking about these charging stations all over the country. Well, who's going to own them? Well, at least to begin with, the federal government's going to own them. And if, for example, the federal government decides that you don't need to charge your car today, then they turn off the charging stations. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere, what are you going to do then? You're going to sit there and wait, is what you're going to do. I mean, this just doesn't work. It does not work. In order for an electric car to work, it's going to have a range of at least 1,000 miles. It's going to have to be able to recharge in less than 20 minutes. There are going to be revolutionary changes in the way we manage electricity. We are still transmitting electricity through wires. We're still transmitting electricity through wires. And those wires soak up a lot of electricity. If we had superconductors, we would need to generate less electricity because the superconductors wouldn't soak up as much, if any at all. But we are decades away from that technology. Oh, they have superconductors, all right. They're cooled with liquid hydrogen, which last I heard was somewhere around minus 460 degrees, something in that nature. Okay, well, you just don't have cryogenic plants like that all over America, do you? I mean, this is absolutely crazy. The only thing that I can say at this particular moment is what they're looking to do. And they seem to be very serious about it. They're looking to essentially control American travel in the United States. The President of the United States has picked up a microphone and is now speaking.
What a great, great crowd. And I tell you what, if I thought I could have ever spoken as well as you did when I was your age, I'd have never thought of being president.
He's referring to the young woman from the IBEW in
With your
Boston.
permission, I'm going to take my coat off. That doesn't mean I not going to speak any longer.
This is the President of
Folks,
the United States.
Welcome to the White House, everybody. And thank you, Levette, for this. This law is for you and for the millions of people like you, good, decent, hardworking Americans. And how about James Taylor, a voice that heals our soul and unites the nation and a good friend? I don't know where James is probably smart enough.
All right, that is the President of the United States. We'll carry this closed circuit for people who want to watch during the break. Otherwise, we'll be back in about 6 minutes with more of the Wells Report as the President of the United States, the Vice President, all celebrate the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Back with more in just a moment. And back to the President now.
Leader Schumer and Joe Manchin. Joe, thanks for sticking with what you said you'd do. Appreciate it. And the committee chairs who worked for almost 2 years to make this law real. And all the House and Senate Democrats who stood together and never, ever, ever gave up. This couldn't have happened without every single one of you. And that's in the literal sense in the Senate. Every single one was required because the other team didn't want to play. And all our distinguished guests, CEOs, advocates, activists, thank you for joining us. And what a great day. Exactly 4 weeks ago today, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, the single most important legislation passed in the Congress to combat inflation and one of the most significant laws in our nation's history, in my view. I said it then, and I'll keep saying it. With this law, the American people won and special interests lost. Say it again. The American people won and special interests lost. Folks, we're going to lower prescription drug costs, lower health insurance costs, lower energy costs for millions of families. I'm going to take the most aggressive action ever to confront the climate crisis and increase our energy security ever in the whole world. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. We're going to build a future, the future, here in the United States of America, with American workers, with American companies, with American-made products. And after years of some of the biggest corporations in the United States paying zero in federal income tax, they'll now have to begin to literally pay their fair share. Today offers proof that the soul of America is vibrant, the future of America is bright, and the promise of America is real. It is real. It is real. This is an extraordinary story being written today in America by this administration as I step all over my coat. Good thing my mom's not around. But look, you're an awful lot of brave allies out there in the Congress. You took a lot of heat, and by so many determined advocates and activists all across the country. And as I look out in this lawn, I see leaders who made the government of America begin to work again, work for the people, not special interests, for the people. Folks, look, elected officials who stood up to the millions of dollars in attack ads from special interests, business leaders who were willing to endure the criticism of many of their colleagues, and so many people who fought for years to lower prescription drug prices and tackle the climate crisis. This is your victory. This is your victory. And that's a fact. And you deserve a huge round of applause. Give them applause, all these people who stood up, every one of them. And let's hear it for the workers in the labor unions, mayors and local officials, environmental activists, students and young people, advocates for senior citizens and families. This is what it looks like when the American government works for the people. When we tell the powerful interests, no, you're not going to get your way. This time, not this year, not this time, not now. Some of my colleagues have been around a long. How long we've been fighting pharma? How long we've been taking on these interests? From the time I got to the Senate 720 years ago. I'm serious. Think about it. Let's be honest. Passing this law wasn't easy. I proposed as soon as I got here, basically. And I've said that day that I was determined to work with Republicans. And I've done that on historic laws like the infrastructure law. Republicans came across the aisle and they've worked with us, and we got it done. Over $1.2 billion to reshape this nation's infrastructure. The CHIPS and Science Act and the PACT Act for veterans and their families. In fact, I think it's fair to say we've achieved more bipartisan agreement in these nearly 2 years in my presidency than anyone thought was even remotely possible when I entered office. So I thank the Republicans who stood up. And I'm proud of it. It's been good for the country. But I believe Republicans could have and should have joined us on this bill as well. After all, this bill cut costs for families, help reduce inflation at the kitchen table, because that's what they look at, how much are their monthly bills and how much do they have to pay out for the necessities. And it gave them just a little more breathing room, as my dad would say. This bill will lower the deficit. This bill alone is going to lower the deficit by $300 billion over the next decade, because it's going to pay less.
Okay, and let's see here. Let's go over there and let's set that right up there, and let's get ready for the new hour. Yow. Goodness gracious sakes. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news. We really do. The real news. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary. That's not the news. That's just my opinion. And that leads us to debate. And that's your opinion. Let's talk about what we're hearing. The President of the United States, with at least 1,000 people, perhaps more, we find ourselves in a position where they are celebrating the Inflation Reduction Act. So James Taylor played, and he doesn't usually show up to do concerts for the Inflation Reduction Act. So it makes you wonder just exactly what are they celebrating? And I think we know what they're celebrating. They're celebrating the skinny Green New Deal that is disguised as the Inflation Reduction Act. Why else would they be here? Unfortunately, as they come to this dais with these people watching and James Taylor singing, there's just a little bit of a problem. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is tanking. At least it was before I left. Let me see what I can do about getting some information for you here. This is a very, very bad day for this. Inflation is still 8.3%. And that caused the Dow Jones, that caused the stock markets to plunge because they were expecting much lower inflation than what they got. And unfortunately, that's not what happened. And so people are extremely concerned about all this. All right. So as we come to this at this particular moment, the Dow Jones is now, they're done for the day. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average is off 1,276.44 points. That's almost 4%. Let's talk a little bit about what CNBC is saying. The stocks fell sharply today after a key August inflation report came in hotter than expected, hurting investor optimism for cooling prices and a less aggressive Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is going to have to jump all over this. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slid 1,276 points. The S&P dropped 4.3%. The NASDAQ Composite sank more than 5%. More than 490 stocks in the S&P 500 fell Remember, they call it the S&P 500 because there are 500 stocks involved in the S&P 500. 490 of them took it in the pants today. With Facebook parent Meta dropping 8%, Caesars Entertainment losing 7.3%. This from CNBC News. The drop erased nearly all of the recent rally for stocks, pulling the S&P 500 back toward its September 6th close and causing traders to glance back at mid-June when the index fell below 3,700. I think we may even go back and retreat to the June lows, said UBS Director of Floor Operations Art Cashin when he was talking today on CNBC's Squawk on the Street. Certainly, the 3,900 is just so tempting. You're pulling back below the 50-day moving average here. It's very much about the technicals. It's not so much that the number one made the economy go topsy-turvy. It means a lot of guys who were making preliminary favorable bets got caught off base. And so, once again, they said, no, it looks like the inflation is going to come down and so on and so on. And it did not. It did not come down. And that means, and the core inflation is up 6.3%, which is what the actual consumer prices are minus gasoline and I believe food. But these are things that these are things you can't hide from, and we have big problems economically, and they're about to get worse. And the president of the United States is strutting back and forth in a beautiful white shirt and a blue tie, and essentially holding court at the in the back door of the White House. Let's listen to what the president has to say as we join his comments.
It offers working families thousands of dollars in energy savings with tax credits and rebates to buy new and efficient appliances. Weatherize their homes, saving hundreds of dollars a year because they're not going to have the heat seeking out through the windows or doors or the air conditioning. It provides tax credits for purchasing heat pumps, rooftop solar, electric stoves and ovens, and so much more. It gives a tax credit up to $7,500 to buy a new electric vehicle or a fuel cell vehicle made in America. And for the first time, you can get a tax credit if you buy a used electric vehicle. American automobile companies and American labor are committing billions of dollars and a great deal of hard work and ingenuity to make electric vehicles and batteries. Because of the infrastructure law, we're going to have 500,000 electric charging stations on our highways across America installed by the IBEW. And they're all going to be made in America. This law will create good-paying union jobs, increase energy security. By the way, I keep talking about union jobs. I'm not anti-business. I'm a capitalist. But here's the deal. The reason I push everyone to use union labor is because they're the most skilled labor in the world. The end of the day, let's hear this out for real. The end of the day, you pay a little more to get the best, but it lasts a lot longer. It's a lot more certain, and it does things that nobody else can do. And by the way, when I hear people say, Biden, you're talking about union, and what about all these people go to college? Guess what? Try being a IBW member that introduced me. 5 years of apprenticeship. 5 years, like going back to college plus a year. 5 years. You're getting paid, but you're not getting paid a regular salary. It takes 5 years to qualify. So, folks, let's give them credit for what they deserve. They're not only good at what they do, they work like hell to get to be able to do what they do. Look, and this legislation is going to help us triple wind power, unleash American manufacturing to own the global market on electric vehicles. We're going to fight the environmental justice and create clean energy jobs and apprenticeships in frontline, fence line communities that have been smothered by the legacy pollution. Tommy, Senator Carper, I was going around today meeting a lot of people out here inside. And one woman said, I'm from Delaware. Remember Route 9? Tommy don't know what Route 9's about. It's one of those fence line communities where all of the pollution, all those factories. You know, I grew up in a little town called Claymont, Delaware, when I was a kid, and it's right on the Pennsylvania state line. We're the largest refineries in the world. More refineries and in that area.
Okay, so the president of the United States is talking about his childhood in Delaware, and he is celebrating the skinny Green New Deal as opposed to the Inflation Reduction Act, and he's talking about union labor and essentially talking about a lot of things that really don't have to do with an awful lot of what's going on around us. We're going to monitor this, and if the president does say something that is worthy of discussion, then we will, by all means, we will be more than happy to return to the president of the United States, and we will talk about such things. In the meantime, let's go ahead and move on with the broadcast. Like I said, we're going to be monitoring the president, and we'll see what he has to say. So let's talk a little bit more about. Somebody's going to ask me why I did that. We said this is supposed to be a news show. It is a news show, actually, but there are things that you do that are not news. Like, for example, I'm just going to make this plain. Let me go over here and say this. I believe the president is not necessarily completely connected with what he's supposed to be doing at this particular moment. And I don't necessarily want to see this president kind of ramble on in front of the entire nation, and certainly 1,000 people at least. I'm just backing away from this because I don't see it improving anything. There was an awful lot of liberal celebration about this bill, and it has nothing to do with inflation reduction. It's all about the Green New Deal. You have the story. And once again, if you want to say, hey, wait a minute, the president was speaking and you broke away. Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. That was my decision. And I normally don't do that. I normally don't. But this president, as you have seen, requires a certain level of protection from the press. Now, I'm not protecting the president because I want to see his political outcomes succeed or his political ideology succeed. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to say, yes, I covered the president responsibly and yet did not take advantage of an elder statesman who is well past his prime. I think this is going to be a bad day for him right now, and so I'm not going to spend all day watching it. Do you mind? If you do, go ahead and say so. I'll take the criticism, but I just wanted to explain. I'm an honest guy, and I just wanted to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep the president from looking like himself. Now I understand why there's somebody in the White House that has the red button that stops the president. Now I understand that. Now I understand what they do. Now they're doing it for completely different reasons. They're doing it because they're trying to fool you. I'm doing it because I can't bear to watch this guy. I just can't bear to watch it. It's elder abuse and I can't stand it. So we're going to move on. In Loudoun County, Virginia, there is a lot of trouble in that county, and it's not just in the schools, but that's where we start this afternoon here on the Wells Report in reporting. A Loudoun County father told Fox News today, or last Friday rather, that a lawsuit against the public school district has been brought because parents feel corruption of children is still ongoing. This father said, quote, I'm the father of 5 children who've gone through the school system. I'm involved in local business and different aspect of governance in our area. And I don't think anyone back in 2019 when this board was elected saw this coming in the insidiousness of the equity agenda and how it's actually played out. This according to Loudoun County parent Clint Thomas. Thomas said thousands and thousands of other parents, teachers, concerned citizens, stakeholders in Loudoun County are saying enough is enough. The America First Legal, okay, it's a conservative organization, through its Center for Legal Equality, filed a lawsuit against Loudoun County Public Schools for the district's systemic and egregious moral corruption of children and its deliberate and almost gleeful violations of parental rights to control the upbringing of their own children. There's obviously more to this story. We are going to cover it. But when it comes to Loudoun County, that's just the beginning. A Loudoun County judge has dismissed a liberal DA from a case involving sexual assault. Where? At the Loudoun County schools. And this judge has dismissed the DA, the district attorney. We'll find out more about that in a moment as we continue on the Wells Report. Back in just a second. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We're talking about leftist ideology and how it's impacting our society. And it is, according to parents in Loudoun County, getting to the point where it's corrupting their children. America First Legal has filed a lawsuit against the Loudoun County Public Schools. And they are doing so with this quote in mind, quote, for the district's systemic and egregious moral corruption of our children and its deliberate, almost gleeful violations of parental rights to control the upbringing of those parents' children. The quote continued, parents across the country should be shocked and horrified to see a once respected school system systematically destroyed, all because Loudoun County Public Schools believes it has more of a right to parent more of a right than parents to tell a captive audience of students what they must believe. This according to America First Legal in a press release. Fortunately, as we have seen, there are no parents with more courage, more fight, more rock-solid dedication to their children than in Loudoun County, Virginia. These people are taking up the fight. There is no doubt about it. Some of the policies targeted in the American First Legal lawsuit, which the group noted was on behalf of 11 courageous parents, includes Policy 840 and Regulation 8040. That's 8040, not 840. 8040 and Regulation 8040, which the group said compels student speech, forces young children to use bathrooms and locker rooms with members of the opposite sex, and keeps parents in the dark when their children lead a double life as a different gender during school hours. Gene Hamilton, the America First Legal Vice President, told Julie Banderas of Fox News that Virginia parents have the fundamental liberty interest to control the upbringing, moral instruction, and education of their children. But what happens when schools, like what we're seeing in Loudoun, Virginia, are violating that fundamental right of parents while also threatening the rights and putting parents in a position where they have to choose? Do I want to be able to continue to control the upbringing of my kids? Or do I want to continue to receive this free education, said Hamilton. That's the choice. They should not be forcing us to make it. That's why we're bringing this lawsuit. That is a very serious problem. This is where we are. And by the way, in case you don't think you have a dog in this hunt, now you may not live in Virginia, but if you do, your property taxes are funding this. Everywhere else in the United States, schools get their funding basically from property taxes. And that means you have a dog in this hunt. You are paying for all of this. And by the way, we, the people of the United States, are going to be paying for all of this for decades to come. Remember, sooner or later, these people that are being educated / indoctrinated / bullied into leftist ideology, well, they're going to be out in the workforce soon. It happens a lot faster than you think, by the way. But this corruption of our children is something that the left needs to start paying attention to, because there can be nothing more divisive. Public schools are public schools that are funded by the public. They are not supposed to be laboratories for leftist academic thought. They are supposed to be teaching our children the necessary bits of knowledge required for a populace that works in a dynamic, fast-moving nation. They have to learn these things. And they're not learning these things. They're learning how to hate each other based on the fact that just because you have white skin, you feel one way, and just because you have black or brown skin, you feel another way. That's what they're teaching. And the solution is to stop funding it. The solution is to stop the funding of public schools. Stop sending your kids to public schools. Stop their funding. The nothing revolution, remember that? What do you do when you want to really revolt seriously and really do some serious moving in America? Nothing. More about that in a moment. This is the Wells Report, back in a flash. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks for being with us today. We're talking about Loudoun County, Virginia, but you don't have to go that far. Somewhere in your state, somewhere maybe in your county, there are people just like the people of the Loudoun County Public Schools that are essentially using your children to further their political delirium. And it is delirium. You may remember the story from Loudoun County, Virginia, where a transgender boy went into a girl's restroom and sexually assaulted a young lady. The father showed up at a school board meeting to essentially tell the school board that they were foolish, Fullish, and he got arrested. Well, apparently there's some sort of trial going on with this very same guy. And it appears as though the Loudoun County judge had enough from the liberal DA in the case. And so they fired him. The judge fired him. A Virginia judge, this from Fox News, has booted liberal Loudoun County Commonwealth attorney Buddha Bibaraj from an appeal case citing concerns over impartiality. The case involved a Virginia father who was arrested last year while speaking out at a school board meeting after his daughter was sexually assaulted in a public school bathroom by a male student. All that Scott Smith and his family has ever asked for is that the Loudoun County school system protect their daughter and treat them fairly. It has not, said Bill Stanley, the attorney for the Virginia father, Scott Smith, in a press release provided to Fox News. The court's order today has corrected in some measure the injustice created by Ms. Bibaraj's bias against Mr. Smith, and the court has restored his hope for a fair trial on the remaining charge against him in his quest to protect his beloved daughter. We are very grateful for the court's ruling. Smith attended the school board meeting last year and railed against the school's failure to protect his daughter. I mean, after she was sexually assaulted in a girl's bathroom in May of 2021 by a male student at Stonebridge High School in Ashburn. The board meeting soon made national headlines, became a focal point of the Virginia gubernatorial election last year, got Terry McAuliffe fired as governor of Virginia. Video and images showed Smith being dragged out of the meeting by law enforcement officials, and the dad said the school board was engaging in a cover-up of the assault. Smith was arrested, convicted of 2 misdemeanors following the school board meeting, disorderly conduct and obstruction of justice during a school board meeting. Circuit Court Judge James Plowman previously dismissed Smith's count of obstruction of justice, and the Virginia dad is now trying to appeal the disorderly conduct count. A September 2nd order from Judge Plowman detailed that he had appointed a special prosecutor in Smith's appeal and booted Soros-backed prosecutor Bibaraj and her office from the case. Not just the state's attorney, not just the district attorney, the district attorney's office. Oh my. Oh my. There is insufficient evidence to determine whether or not a direct conflict exists that would mandate removal and or disqualification of the Loudoun County Commonwealth's attorney's office. Judge Plowman's order states. Plowman said that he found Smith's lawyers persuasive during oral arguments and granted Smith's motion to recuse the Loudoun County Commonwealth Attorney's Office. Stafford County Commonwealth Attorney Eric Olson will now handle the disorderly conduct count and the appeal. The concerns about public confidence and the integrity of the prosecution, as well as the defendant's concerns regarding the impartiality of the Commonwealth's attorney, are sufficiently grounded. As a result, the integrity of the defendant's due process rights is in jeopardy and must be protected, said Judge Plowman. Smith welcomed the news, according to a press release from his attorney's office. Quote, "A fair system of criminal justice is void of both bias and political agendas, and that is the cornerstone of a free society. From the beginning, Ms. Bibaraj has sought to make an example of me for simply standing up to defend my daughter at the now infamous Loudoun County school board meeting. Buddha Bibaraj has demonstrated a bias against me throughout the court proceedings. She has continued to fan the flames of those who would label parents like me who stand in protection of their kids against dangerous school policies as being, quote, domestic terrorists. Nothing could be further from the truth. Biberaj's office did not immediately respond to Fox News' request for comments. She did express surprise over the removal of her office in a comment to WTOP radio. She said, I'm surprised by the court's decision since I was never given the opportunity to come back and have conversations about disorderly conduct. Olson, the longest serving incumbent prosecutor in Northern Virginia, and a Republican, said Judge Plowman called him about the change, according to WTOP. Judge Plowman called me and asked me if I was available, said Olson. As often is the case, a special prosecutor can be necessary because of a potential conflict of interest. Stanley told Fox News Monday afternoon Smith has a right for a fair trial and lamented the political nature of Biberaj's office during the case. Quote, believe it or not, prosecutors are supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to look at the facts, apply the law, and if so, then prosecute. This seemed to turn very political very quickly in the battle in Loudoun County between this prosecutor who had been funded by George Soros, according to the attorney, noting that Biberaj took it upon herself to personally prosecute the case. This is not the first time Judge Plowman has booted Biberaj's office out of court. That's interesting. He removed the county's Commonwealth Attorney's Office from a serial burglary case in June for, quote, deliberately misleading the court and the public, unquote. The Commonwealth is deliberately misleading the court and the public in an effort to sell the plea agreement for some reason that is yet to be explained, said Judge Plowman. It involved a man charged with 3 misdemeanors for destruction of property and false identification, 2 felonies for burglary. Attorney Biberaj in the Loudoun County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is hereby removed and disqualified from further prosecution as counsel of record in this matter, according to the judge. The state's Republican Attorney General, Jason Miyares, sent a letter to the Chief Judge shortly after that order, saying the court has rightfully lost confidence in Biberaj and her office. He added that his office was ready to assist, even prosecute the case, considering this unprecedented development, according to the letter which was provided to Fox News. Stanley, the new prosecutor from a different county, told Fox News that though the judge and the prosecutor were the same in the Smith's legal battle and the serial burglary case, these are 2 different cases. One has nothing to do with the other, of course. Judge Plowman, by the way, is a Republican who previously served as the Loudoun County Commonwealth's attorney before Biberaj's election in 2019. And so this is what happens when you have political law. You don't have law. You don't have law. You have political lynch mobs. That's what you have. And once again, we see the tentacles of George Soros. And by the way, it's not just Virginia. George Soros has laid $1 billion on the Democrat challenger for Greg Abbott in the 2022 gubernatorial election. $1 billion. Excuse me? Now, at some point, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do about campaign finance. I don't know exactly what the idea is, but what I'm truly believing, more than anything, is an individual. All campaign contributions must be on an individual basis, and there has to be a limit. I would say $25,000. I would say that would be absolutely necessary, because Buddha Biberaj is a creature of George Soros. She wouldn't have gotten his backing nor his money if it wasn't for the fact that she is clearly beholden to him. He went shopping for attorneys that he could make district attorneys, and by golly, he found a whole bunch of them. Mike Renwee adds that while we're doing campaign finance reform, no out-of-state contributions. I agree. I absolutely agree. They can do it with car insurance. They can do it with health insurance. You can't sell health insurance across state lines. you have to have local offices. So no out-of-state contributions, no corporate contributions. I know the Supreme Court found that in the Citizens United case, that corporations were essentially individuals with free speech rights, but I vehemently disagree. I do. And so now we're in a position where we simply must do something. I mean, Loudoun County, Virginia is this center point because these people actually stood up and actually told them to stop. And look at what's happening. The rest of the machine is sort of playing its part. Something happens at a school, somebody complains to the school board, that person gets arrested, disorderly conduct, all manner of other things. So suddenly now we're in a position where this guy has been convicted on a couple of misdemeanors, although one was set aside. One was dismissed. This other one is an appeal of an original conviction. And who's got his hands around it? George Soros's prosecutors got their hands around it. And so now what we have such a political judicial system that judges are actually setting aside prosecutors in cases. People who work for the state, people who have been elected, they're being set aside by judges that are more interested in a fair trial than somebody grinding a political axe. Look, this is how this happens. This is how a great country becomes a not so great country. It happens just exactly as we're seeing it here. We can't have it. We simply cannot. And so, what is the solution? You got one? Share it. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. I think that's the one. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm so upset. Listen, this is getting completely out of hand. And once again, like I keep saying, this comes back to voters. So the voters of the United States, counties, cities, this money only works to buy advertising, right? And just because it's on television, does that mean you should believe it? Now, I know I'm speaking to the choir because, honest to goodness, if you were getting your news from, say, for example, I don't know, a television station somewhere, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here. If you figured that there was actual news in some of these other outlets, and there are a lot of them. CNN's broadcasting right now, Fox News is broadcasting right now, MSNBC is broadcasting right now, Newsmax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One America's News. The BBC, for crying out loud. But yet you're still here. And so what we have, once again, getting back to the machine, and Loudoun County is the perfect example. You have politics being played in schools. A child gets raped or sexually assaulted. The father loses it. He gets arrested. He gets charged. He has to go to court. He has to hire a lawyer because his daughter was sexually assaulted in a bathroom, a girl's bathroom at a school by a boy pretending to be a girl and being egged on in that pretense by the school administrators, by the school board itself, by teachers. And just like that, young woman is sexually assaulted. And yeah, the father is deserted. I can't believe he was charged in the first place. And so now what he's trying to do is he's trying to get a fair trial in his appeal from a George Soros appointed or elected, helped to be elected prosecutor. The only thing that's missing in this political machine is the mainstream media calling the dad an absolute brute for trying to push around school district personnel. And I'm sure they thought about it too. And then suddenly said, whoa. We're not going to deal with this. We're just going to stick with the facts. What a great idea. Think of that. A news organization that sticks with the facts. Gee, do you know any of those? I know exactly one. This one. It's the Wells Report. Back with more in a moment. News, analysis, commentary, debate. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Just talking about Loudoun County, Virginia. We're talking about a political judiciary, which seamlessly brings us to our next circumstance. And that has to do with the Department of Justice and their latest flurry of subpoenas, over 30, in fact, to aides of former President Donald Trump. Does this look like a political lynch mob to you? I'm just asking. Talking about not the 30 advisors to President Trump. I'm talking about the Department of Justice issuing over 30 subpoenas. 2 former presidential advisors. And aides. The Justice Department also seized phones. Listen to this. The Justice Department also seized phones from 2 top Trump advisors in the investigation, which aims to probe President Trump's unsubstantiated claims of a rigged 2020 presidential election. The dozens of new subpoenas mark a rapid escalation in pressure applied to the Trump camp by the DOJ. This, by the way, from Fox News. The Justice Department is investigating allegations of phony Electoral College certifications from 2020 that declared Republicans were the electors voting for Trump and Mike Pence, when in fact, Democrats won and voted for President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Timothy Parlatore, an attorney for President Trump, a confidant, and former New York Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, confirmed that Kerik received a subpoena last Tuesday to appear before a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. Multiple reports have pointed to allegedly fake documents obtained by the watchdog group American Oversight, which included paperwork from slates of Republican would-be electors in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, New Mexico, and Arizona. DOJ officials are waging a two-front war with ongoing investigations into both Trump's claims of a rigged election and the recent raid on Mar-a-Lago that discovered a wealth of classified documents retained in his possession after leaving office. I would scarcely say that out of, I don't know, something along the line of 30,000 documents, that 11 was a wealth of classified documents, but okay. Trump's legal team opposed the Justice Department motion to continue its review of classified documents seized by the FBI during its raid of Mar-a-Lago last month, slamming the entire investigation as unprecedented and misguided, and one that has spiraled out of control, while stressing the government has not yet proven the records still remain classified. In a filing yesterday, Trump's team, and reported on the Wells Report, Trump's legal team said the Justice Department is seeking to limit the scope of any review of its investigative conduct and presupposition of the outcome, at least in regards to what it deems are classified records. All right, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about, once again, our latest analog having to do with the Department of Justice when it comes to things along this line. It goes right back to Hillary Clinton. Let me ask you a question. When we're talking about confiscating phones of Trump officials, how many phones did we confiscate from Hillary Clinton officials? Robbie Mook's phone? No. Joel Benenson? No. How about John Podesta? Gee, I wonder what was on John Podesta's phone. You suppose that was one of the phones that got destroyed by a hammer? Let's see, Huma Abedin. Once again, did we ever find out anything else about Anthony Weiner's laptop? I know we've been focused on Hunter Biden's laptop a lot, but what about Anthony Weiner's laptop? Still nothing on that? Okay. Jake Sullivan. Did they ever confiscate any of the phones in his possession? Let's see what else. Oh, and that Cheryl Mills. I happen to know for a fact that her BlackBerry was destroyed with a hammer, along with Hillary's BlackBerry and Huma Abedin's BlackBerry. So once again, what is the mission of the Department of Justice? Is it equal application of federal law? Is it investigation of federal crime? Or is it the absolute sundering of political opponents? The suppression of anti-Democrat thought? What are we doing here? Now, I don't know exactly where this is going to end up. All I do know is that President Trump is now in a situation where, man, the DOJ is just abandoning all pretense of any kind of concern whatsoever about chasing after this guy. And with every time they do something like this, they up the ante. Okay? When they went into his house, that meant that what they're trying to prosecute him on had better rise to the level of doing nothing that has never been done in American history. The FBI raid of a former president's home. Now they're out in the open, sending out subpoenas to 30 of President Trump's aides and advisors. That ups the ante on the crime. They're going to run out of crime before they run out of really bad tactics, it looks like to me. This is the Wells Report. See you next hour. And just like that, thanks very much for sticking around that hour. Once again, my apologies for dumping the president. north to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for joining us today. We bring you the news. We report the news fairly. We report it truthfully. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary on the news after that analysis, and that is not news. That's simply my opinion, just as valuable as yours, which leads us seamlessly to debate. By all means, tell us what you think. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. You can join us on the chat room. It's been flying today. Lots of things to talk about. If you missed the last hour of this broadcast, make sure you go back and get it. We talk about Loudoun County in a couple of different ways, not just the school board itself that created a whole bunch of downstream messes, but some of the downstream messes, up to and including a judge setting aside the district attorney's office, not just the district attorney, but the district attorney's office trying to prosecute a father whose daughter was sexually assaulted in a school restroom by a transgender child who was essentially being egged on by school personnel. Not for the sexual assault, but for the fact that, yeah, he had a perfect right to be a young boy in a young lady's restroom. It's outrageous on its face. This just in from the Wall Street Journal. Ken Starr, the high-profile lawyer whose investigation led to President Bill Clinton's impeachment, and who later saw his own reputation tarnished when he was ousted as president of Baylor University for his handling of a sexual assault scandal there, has died. He was just 76 years old. Mr. Starr died in Houston today of complications from surgery, according to a statement released by his family. Mr. Starr, who clerked for Chief Justice Warren Burger in the 70s, was an early star of the conservative legal vanguard that came to Washington with President Ronald Reagan. He served as a top Justice Department official before Mr. Reagan appointed him to the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. That happened in 1983. Still in his 30s, then Judge Starr seemed a likely prospect for elevation to the Supreme Court, particularly after President George H.W. Bush in 1989 named him Solicitor General. In that role, he represented the federal government in most of the 36 cases he argued before the Supreme Court in his long legal career. Mr. Bush, President Bush the first, passed over Mr. Starr in favor of David Souter for a 1990 High Court vacancy. Instead, Mr. Starr would see two protégés ascend to the Supreme Court: John Roberts, once Deputy Solicitor General in 2005, and then in 2018, Brett Kavanaugh, who assisted Mr. Starr in the assignment that would define his career and alter the course of American politics, the Whitewater investigation. An Arkansas land developer gone sour, Whitewater attracted attention because its investors included Bill and Hillary Clinton, for many years the state's first couple. In 1994, after Mr. Clinton won the presidency, a panel of D.C. judges appointed Mr. Starr to continue the investigation, investigating possible financial misconduct involving the land deal. No charges ever filed against the Clintons over the investment, but the Starr investigation expanded to explore other allegations against the president. It went into high gear after a former White House employee, Linda Tripp, provided the independent counsel with tapes of secretly recorded phone conversations in which former White House intern Monica Lewinsky discussed her affair with Mr. Clinton. Ms. Tripp had given similar information to attorneys for Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee who sued Mr. Clinton for sexual harassment. But when asked about Ms. Lewinsky in a deposition for the Jones case, the president denied it. The Starr investigation picked up that thread a month after Mr. Clinton admitted to the Lewinsky affair on September 11th, 1998. He filed a report to the House of Representatives documenting the events and accusing the president of perjury. The rest is history. Independent counsel Ken Starr is dead at age 76 years old. While we're on the subject of the Justice Department and so on, let's talk a little bit about a poignant story in today's USA Today. It's from John Fritzy. More than 2 years after COVID-19 forced the Supreme Court to conduct much of its work remotely, Chief Justice John Roberts announced the ornate courtroom will reopen to the public when its new term starts next month. Chief Justice Roberts, speaking at a conference in Colorado on Friday night, also defended the court's legitimacy. This, according to media reports. The justices have faced criticism on the left and protests for the decision in June to overturn Roe v. Wade and end the constitutional right to an abortion established by that decision in 1973. Once again, this is USA Today. That did not establish a constitutional right to an abortion. The court cannot do that. The court cannot establish a right. They cannot unilaterally discover through an appeals process of a particular case. They cannot discover a constitutional right which is not there. Because the Constitution itself says that should there be any other issue that's not covered in this document, that decision goes to the states. That's the problem with Roe v. Wade. That's the problem with the entire decision. And because the mainstream media is simply dishonestly reporting, we have something like this. The justices have faced criticism on the left and protests for the decision in June to overturn Roe v. Wade. That should be the end of the sentence. Roberts said that all the court's opinions are open to criticism, but he said that simply because people disagree with opinions, it's not a basis for questioning the legitimacy of a court or the court. The court has always decided controversial cases, and decisions have always been subject to intense criticism, and that's entirely appropriate. True. He was speaking, by the way, to a gathering of lawyers in Colorado Springs. You don't want the political branches telling you what the law is. You don't want public opinion to be the guide of what the appropriate decision is, said Roberts. This according to the Post. The High Court switched to a virtual argument format in early 2020 for the first time in its history, as the coronavirus pandemic began closing down in-person meetings at businesses, schools, and government buildings. Last year, the High Court held arguments in person, but the court building itself remained closed to the public. A handful of journalists, law clerks, and court staff were in the courtroom along with the justices and the lawyers. The move was the latest step in the gradual reopening of the nation's highest court, which, in addition to being closed to the public, was walled off by a large fence in the aftermath of the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, a ruling that sparked large protests at the court and at some of the justices' homes over the summer. All right, I got to talk about that. The reason that there was a fence put around the Supreme Court, the reason that there was a fence put around the Capitol building, the reason that these things are happening is because of various malfunctions spanning very different groups of people in American government. If, say, for example, you don't want the Capitol walled off by razor wire and chain link fencing and, oh, by the way, 26,000 troops, maybe what you ought to do is not do something that would inflame the American people to that level. We know what our country is based on. Bill of Rights, Constitution. We know what the country, we know how it works. We know what this country looks like when it is running at full song. We do. And that's not what's happening. That is not what's happening. There were clear problems with the 2020 election. So many clear problems that people showed up in Washington to express their disapproval. That disapproval was immediately, forcefully, and in at least one case, murderously suppressed. There was just plain dishonest reporting that continues to this very day. And that is likewise true for the Dobbs decision, the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. It was misreported from the get-go, except right here. We knew exactly what the Supreme Court was doing. The rest of the mainstream media must have known what the Supreme Court was actually doing, which was to return to the constitutional framework that says the judiciary cannot create law. It can only interpret them. We know how to amend the Constitution. If you want a constitutional right for abortion in this nation, put together an amendment, argue for it in the legislatures, make your case, get your votes, be victorious, and then lobby in all the various states, because it takes 2/3 of them to agree, and boom, you got yourself a constitutional amendment. That's the only way you can amend the Constitution, except, of course, for an Article 25 convention of the states. And if you want to do it in the Article 25 convention of the states, have at it. That's the way you're supposed to do it. You're not supposed to have 9 unelected judges in robes just creating out of thin air constitutional amendments. Getting back to the reality of this, the mainstream media refused to tell that story. They refused to tell that story. They inflamed the public. They turned it into this horrifying thing that, well, if they're going to do this, then they're going to do that, and then they'll do that. And then because they do those two things, they're going to do this and that. And before you know it, they're going to be eating Cocker Spaniel puppies in public. That's what the mainstream media did. And you know what was really weird? The very political Department of Justice didn't do anything to protect those justices. Didn't do anything. They had laws that they could have enforced. They didn't. And now this very same mainstream media is refusing to defend the court and its legitimacy, although I have to point out that USA Today is publishing this article. Now, I do not know where the mainstream media went to school. I do, however, know that I went to Mr. Lafferty's government class. I knew how the government worked. Really didn't need the class. I spent most of the time in class reading Time Magazine, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report. He told me that I was going to have to take this class again, and I was going to have to take this class again in the summer. And I said, I think I'm okay. I think I've got it. And I said, so if I pass the final, will you give me a C? He says, okay, but you're not going to. I had the third highest class. I had the third highest score in the senior class. And he couldn't believe it. I had good teachers. But where are the teachers that know how to actually report how the tripartite government of the United States works? Because whoever those guys are, they've been taking the years off. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. USA Today reports that 5 years ago, a retired postal worker on the 32nd floor of a Las Vegas hotel carried out the deadliest mass shooting in American history, reopening a debate over a device that he possessed at that time called a bump stock. And this is where the journalism begins to fall apart for USA Today. What they write is a device known as a bump stock that turns a semi-automatic rifle into something closer to a machine gun. It doesn't turn the rifle into anything. It doesn't make the rifle into anything. What it does is it allows you to pull the trigger much faster than you physically could otherwise. What it does is it allows the recoil of the rifle comes back. You pull the trigger, the recoil of the rifle comes back, and then if you hold your finger in place and push forward on the bump stock or push forward on the forestock of the weapon, your finger will pull the trigger again, repeating the process. Is it very much like automatic fire? Yeah. Yeah, with a little practice, you can make it sound like a fully automatic rifle. You can. Now, I'm not a big fan of full automatic rifles. I think it's a frightful waste of ammunition. But that doesn't mean that I think that it was right or proper for the Trump administration to call for a ban on these bump stocks. Okay? 5 years ago, this retired postal worker had a bump stock and pulled off the deadliest mass shooting in American history. Within a few months, then President Donald Trump moved to ban bump stocks through regulation, asserting the policy would, quote, make it easier for men and women of law enforcement to protect our children and to protect our safety, unquote. There are now 2 legal challenges to the Trump administration prohibition. They are pending in the Supreme Court of the United States, including one that has been rescheduled for consideration 20 times. The lack of a decision about whether or not the court will hear the litigation has led to speculation among some experts who follow the issue closely that the court's 6-3 conservative majority may not necessarily agree on how to proceed. The court twice declined emergency requests from gun groups to delay implementation of the ban in 2019, and it declined to hear a similar challenge in 2020. Since then, Associate Justice Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation has given the conservatives a supermajority, an advantage they have pressed elsewhere, including cases with abortion, religion, and the Second Amendment. The 6 conservatives on the high court right now aren't really on the same page about guns as much as people think they are, said Drew Stevenson, a professor at South Texas College of Law, Houston. Some in the court's conservative wing, he said, quote, might be afraid to take the case if they're not sure they're going to be able to get their way, unquote. In addition to once again raising the issue of guns at the nation's highest court in months after it decided a landmark Second Amendment case, the new legislation also delves into how much power federal agencies have to create regulations when the law those rules are based on is unclear. Conservatives for years have sought to limit that agency discretion, and their arguments seem to be gaining traction with the high court, as they should. Here's the circumstance. We are in this mess. We are in these difficulties because we refuse to follow the Constitution of the United States the way it is intended to be followed. We shouldn't be infringing on the rights of people and their weaponry. We just shouldn't. Well, John David, automatic weapons, they're illegal. Well, should they be? Should they be? We'll talk more about that coming up in just a couple of seconds. You're listening to the Wells Report. I've got more to say on this, so stay right where you are as we continue with the Wells Report for Tuesday, the 13th of September. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We're talking about what is, I would say, malfeasance on the part of the mainstream media regarding not just decision-making in the Supreme Court of the United States, but misreporting all manner of things, up to and including the story that we're dealing with right here. There are a couple of cases before the Supreme Court that may or may not be heard in this next session regarding the President of the United States at the time's decision to ban bump stocks, which allow you to fire a weapon rapidly, almost to the point of it being an automatic rifle. And the way, I mean, when I tried one out, I was able to approximate a fully automatic M16 with my AR-15, firing the same round, etc. I was perfectly able to do that. But, you know, once you get practiced with it, you get pretty good at it. But the thing about it is it's unnecessary. It's truly unnecessary, at least in my opinion. But my opinion doesn't matter, because you see, we have this Constitution that says the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay? It doesn't say what kind of arms. It just says arms. We get to keep our weapons. Years and years and years ago, during the Untouchables phase, when we were playing around with the constitutional amendment, which, by the way, was a real constitutional amendment that banned alcohol in the United States, kicking off organized crime, there were a lot of guys carrying Thompson submachine guns out on the streets, and those were made illegal. And nobody fought against it. They should have. Why, John David, would you want people with automatic weapons? Well, it's not that I want people with automatic weapons. I just happen to know how the Constitution works. As a matter of fact, I'm reasonably sure that there's a perfectly constitutional way to illegalize automatic weapons without trampling on the Constitution or the Second Amendment. Oh, yeah, Mr. Wells? Well, how the hell do you do that? This way. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. What it says is, if it's not in the Constitution, then, or prohibited by the Constitution, the states get to make up their mind. You see, it's a huge error to have the Supreme Court of the United States determining what gun rights are in the United States. It's a huge error. The Supreme Court of the United States should be dealing with laws regarding whether or not the Second Amendment is being abused by the states. And that's where all of this starts to unravel. The Supreme Court of the United States should overturn any laws having anything to do with weaponry in the United States. Any law. And let the states make laws that satisfy the states' beliefs in what gun regulation should be. Why? I'll tell you why. Because we can vote those people out of office if we don't like their decision making. We can vote them out of office. We can vote them out of office and get people in there that do believe in our decision making. That's called democracy. That's the way it is supposed to work. So this mess, if you don't go back to the actual beginning of it, the first infringement on the people of the United States, the first infringement of the Second Amendment, you don't go back to that and fix that problem, then garbage in, garbage out. You're going to have this throughout time. Now we have bump stocks. It's not the federal government's job to ban bump stocks. It's Texas's job. It's Illinois' job. It's Ohio's job. It's Wyoming's job. It has nothing to do with the federal government. And to be perfectly honest with you, now we have this mess caused by the Trump administration using essentially agency or executive branch agency regulations as law. That must be set aside. Unless those regulations are passed by a legislature, they are not laws and cannot be enforced as such. They can't fine people. They can't arrest people. They can't do any of that stuff unless it's codified by law. And that's been set aside by the people running this government long before even we were alive. Perfect example, Roe v. Wade. It was none of the federal government's business to have anything to do with abortion law in this nation. There was no right created out of thin air based on one singular court case. If you want to amend the Constitution, you have to do it properly. And the Supreme Court said so. And then one of our Democrat friends said, now, wait a minute, to be clear here. Judge Clarence Thomas said that he was willing to look at gay marriage and birth control. Not true. Justice Clarence Thomas is willing to look at the Supreme Court decisions regarding gay marriage and birth control to see if they actually comport with what the Supreme Court and what the federal government should be doing in the United States of America. A federal right created by a federal court works in a federal republic. That's not what we have. We do not have the Federal Republic of the United States. We have the United States of America. The states have their say, and they should have their say. And that's the way the country is created. That's why, and because of that, let's say Wyoming, okay? Let's say Wyoming. Let's say John David's set aside of any government law, any federal law that infringed on the Second Amendment. I found all of those unconstitutional. Okay? Is California going to allow automatic weapons in their state? Probably not. Well, what about Wyoming? Whoa. Why not? Why not Wyoming? Lots and lots of land, not a whole lot of people. An automatic weapon would be useful in Wyoming. They should be able to make their own decisions. A lot of people, ask me what I think about national reciprocity when it comes to concealed carry law. I don't think I want a federal, unless it goes through all the processes. A federal reciprocity law so that if I get a concealed weapons permit in Texas, I can go to Illinois. Do I think I should carry my weapon in Illinois? Hell yes. Do you read the news about Chicago? Yeah, I better take my weapon with me, except the people of Illinois need to make that decision. See, to me, you don't pass a federal law talking about national reciprocity when it comes to concealed weapons carry. What you do is you work with the states, and many of them have. My concealed carry license is reciprocated with in, I think, 48 states, or 40, 46, 42, a bunch of states. Every time I go someplace else, I make sure that my concealed weapons permit is okay there. And I think that's fine. I don't have any problem with that because we live in the United States of America. To get back to gay marriage and birth control, once again, just like the Dobbs case, that's a decision for the states to make. because the states know more about themselves than the federal government ever will. The people of those states can take care of someone that they think is misusing their office, whether it's their decision making, whether their politics, what they're trying to do. That's for the voters to decide in those states. That's what has to happen. That's the way I see it. The United States of America. Look, it may not, I can't see any reason why there shouldn't be same-sex, marriage. I don't know that I would call it marriage because I believe that marriage is biblical. That makes it religious. I don't believe, and the Supreme Court of the Constitution of the United States is very clear in the First Amendment. There will be no establishment of a state religion. To say, for example, that gay marriage is marriage establishes a state religion. Should there be a way for these people to unite? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is a marriage at a courthouse somehow less than a marriage in a church? It depends on the church. Since we will make no law that infringes on the right of religious practice or a church or creating a church, since that's what the First Amendment says, it seems to me that what we need to do more than anything is essentially let people do as they choose when it comes to uniting themselves in a way acceptable to a church. Don't force a church to do something they don't want to do. Don't force anybody to do anything they don't want to do when it comes to gay marriage. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. If Caesar wants to have, same-sex marriage, fine. The people vote on it, fine. No problem, done. Render unto the Lord what is the Lord's. Marriage has a biblical genesis, pardon the pun. And that's where it belongs. And those people that somehow believe, no, I should be able to go in any church anywhere and be able to marry my best friend Bob. Okay, well, no. That infringes on the rights of the people in the church, doesn't it? Because they go to that church for a reason. They follow that religion for a reason. Everybody does not have to comport to your ideas of same-sex marriage. But that's the way the country's built. That's the way the country's built. And I find it ridiculous as far as Clarence Thomas looking at contraception. No. That's not the federal government's business. The Supreme Court doesn't have any business on any of this. Okay? That's just the way it is. So now, because we screw things up, because we are in a position where we have, bastardized the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the way our country works, right? That doesn't mean that we should just go with the flow, which is what Roe v. Wade was all about. It created a constitutional right to an abortion, e pluribus unum. Wrong. No, it didn't. It said that a law prohibiting an abortion was unconstitutional. A particular law in a particular state. And this is where the dishonesty in reporting begins. See how all this works? See how all this comes together? This collection of power. It's not difficult if you think it over. But the very best country that ever figured out all of this stuff and created a framework that works to the benefit of just about everybody. There are people that would, as a matter of fact, completely and totally do whatever they want to. Those are anarchists. And anarchists are not going to be satisfied by any kind of government. That's why they are anarchists. Anyway, that being said, we came up with the best possible system that covers the most possible array of needs and rights, laws and wants. Why would we keep screwing around with it? Let's restore it, shall we? This is the Wells Report. Back in a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. You can join us on the chat room. Please do. We appreciate it. The Senate is expected to start the process to consider a bill to protect same-sex marriage on the federal level this week. It marks the culmination of a months-long effort by Democrats and some Republicans to codify a Marriage Equality Act after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. What is this? It's a political opportunity. That's what this is. The House passed the Marriage Equality Bill, titled the Respect for Marriage Act, in a 267 to 157 vote in July, sending the measure to the Senate for consideration. 47 Republican yes votes fueled the Democrat hopes that the legislation could eventually land on the president's desk. The Senate is expected to continue the conversation regarding government funding, which also has to be passed by September 30th, or Washington will shut down. Let it shut down, please. Let's see. What are we talking about here? All right. So that's all they have here. Now, once again, there are a lot of people who are saying that not only is this going to be under consideration, but the Republicans should support it. Look, what I see in this nation, and it's beginning to drive me a little crazy. Okay. What drives me crazy is that for some reason, there needs to be a political solution for everything. That's how we got this mess. That's how we got this mess in the first place, where the federal government does everything. And that's how the federal government is now $30.8 trillion in debt. Because they're trying to do everything. Okay? It's like this case. It's not any of the federal government's business. They are passing this law because they are afraid that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to say, hey, look, it's not the federal government's business to regulate same-sex marriage. So they're going to codify it first. Now, I don't have any problem with them trying it. I don't have any problem with them passing it. I don't have any problem with them sending it to the president. If it's a bipartisan effort, et cetera, that's fine. My problem has nothing to do with the actual idea of same-sex marriage. It has to do with my philosophy about what this country is and how we do our business. We do our business as the United States of America. Let the states decide. Let the states decide. Instead of the federal government just saying, you will do. We need to get away from that. We need to get away from that, especially in things along this nature. One of the great things about the United States, we have actually 57 different ways to govern people every single day, the state legislatures and assemblies. And we get to watch them. And we get to see what works, and we get to see what doesn't work. And if it works, what do you need a federal law for? Okay? That's what I see. But what I also see is we are mistaking politics for doing the right thing. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to legislate the right thing. Well, that's how you end up courting disaster. Because once you make a political issue the law of the land, what if you disagree politically? Well, then you're breaking the law. Well, if I disagree politically, I'm breaking the law? Well, that's what the law says. You're breaking it? Yeah. Well, what about the First Amendment? And by the way, we're fighting that fight right this minute. You see, this is where politics and law has got to diverge. And I don't think, listen, I want people to marry the people they love. I want people to make long-term commitments to the people they're in love with. I don't care who they're in love with. I don't care. As long as everybody's happy. What happens behind closed doors between consenting adults is none of our business. Up to and including protecting the idea that somebody ought to be able to go into a courthouse and say, hey, I want to get married. See, the problem with this law is the next round of legislation, if there is this codified law of same-sex marriage, we're going to be telling churches what to do. And the answer is no. We don't tell churches what to do. That's why we need to differentiate between a civil union and a church marriage. That way everyone wins, except for those people envious of a church wedding that don't want to comply with the wishes of the church and then turn to the federal government to force the church to do what they want instead of what the church itself stands for. That's the problem. And the courts need to get out of the way. You're listening to the Wells Report. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you very much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Okay. And with that, all right. Listen, I hope you thought that was all but one only watching. What? If Apple made those with all the upgrades, you have a harem. Please shut down DC and set those millions back. Shoot, the show's over. Yes, it's over. The party's over. So I got to go. Okay? So I'll be back again tomorrow. Oh, thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate it. I'll be back again tomorrow. So God love all y'all and take good care of y'all. Make good decisions and be safe. Okay? And I'll see you tomorrow for another edition of the Wells Report. All right. Let's see here. Let me do this real fast. Let me double check. Have a good one. 10-7. Absolutely out of service.